One of the most searched for topics on YouTube by DJs is how to level up as a DJ, how to get better. And in this week and also next week's video, I'm going to share with you some very simple yet very effective techniques which you can implement today, which will take your DJing to the next level, both on and off the decks. In this video, we're focusing very much on the decks. Next week, what you can do behind the scenes, off the decks, just because, of course, as you know, DJing is just more than playing out to a crowd in 2025. Let's get started. Okay, so let's jump onto the decks first and foremost. I've got my trusty FLX4 controller here. I'm going to be using rekordbox for this demonstration in hardware unlock mode, which is the free mode of rekordbox. Now, for these demonstrations, I'm going to assume that you already know the fundamentals of mixing two tracks together and that you already know a bit about beats, bars, and phrases, so how to count like a DJ. If you are unsure of beats, bars, and phrases, what exactly I'm talking about here, I do have a full-length video on the channel, and I do recommend that you check that out ahead of what we're going to talk about today. So please do check that out. I'll leave a link in the description down below. But if you are still messing up mixing by phrase, placing your mixes, don't worry about this. I still do this after many years of being a DJ. And one way in which you can level up your DJing is by going through your tracks in rekordbox and actually setting little markers through your tracks, so in your track preparation. Now you can do this both with a controller connected like this, or you can do it just off the controller. So I've got the controller connected, so I've got a track loaded here, and we're gonna set a couple of memory markers so that it will help you with your counting. Now, a couple of ways in which you can do it. You can use hot cues, so simply use your hot cues. You just got to remember, so that hot cue is set there. So that's an idea. Or what I do is use memory cues. So you can see here, I've got these memory cues set through the track, and this just helps me with phrase mixing. And I usually set memory cues at the start of different phrases. So in order to do this, all you need to do is scroll through the track to where you want that memory cue to start, hit Q, and then on your FLX4, hit Shift, and then the cue loop call button, the right-hand button there. And then you can see there, this red marker that has now appeared, and that just shows where I have set that memory cue point. So this can really help you with your counting. To delete it, if you have done it in the wrong place, hit Shift and then hit the left button where it says there. So that's just a couple of things that you can do, because phrase mixing and improving on your phrase mixing is a way in which you can level up your DJing. Now, when it comes to mixing itself, a couple of very simple techniques that you can do is during your transitions, during your build-ups, and just before the drops, you can start to play around with effects. Now, what I would say to all new DJs is do not overuse effects, because if you use it on every single mix, it just sounds a little bit cluttered. And if you use effects all over the place, it does sound a little bit messy. But before you mix out of a track, if you play around with some effects, it can really add a little bit of extra anticipation. It can help with the flow of the transition a lot better. And so these are some really simple things that you can do. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So I've got this Tell Me Something Art Slaves edit on the left deck here. Let's hit record. There we go. This is actually by Mood Edits. I would check them out. I highly recommend them. They're actually on Bandcamp. And then I've got In the Block by Thomas Bisquera on the right-hand deck here, which I'm going to mix into. So I'm going to mix from left to right. So I'm going to first and foremost show you the transition without any effects, and then we're going to swap over and do it with some effects in. And you don't have to copy what I am doing. You can just play around with the effects, see what works, see what sounds good for you. So first and foremost, these are going to be mixing in phrase. Obviously, you wouldn't mix like this to a crowd, but I'm going to start both tracks simultaneously. There we go. We've got the left one playing out to the crowd. and I'm going to slowly bring in the right hand track. Because of how the phrases work, I don't need to take out the bass on the incoming track or do a bass swap here. And that kind of works, you know, you've got a little bit more to go on the tell me something, but it's kind of just this, the boring bit before the next breakdown. So that seemed to work, and then it's got the vocal breakdown on this track. Okay, so that was okay, it sounded all right, but what you can do is, let's start again. I'm now going to combine two effects when I mix out the first track. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is I'm going to apply a half beat echo. Okay, first and foremost, and then just before I bring this track down, I'm then going to apply a generic filter color effect. So that's going to sound like this. So it's just going to make things transition a little bit neater. It's going to add a little bit of extra tension, and in my opinion, it's just going to make the mix flow a little bit better. So let me show you how this is going to work. So. Don't need to do the bass swap, remember? So there you see, it just adds a little bit something extra into the mix, something a little bit interesting, and it will just show the audience that, oh, something's happening, something's changing, as opposed to a very hard finish to you know, track number one into track number two. So that's a little idea. Start playing around with effects during your transitions. Obviously that's a very simple half beat echo, and then I've just used the filter on the color effect there. So that could be an idea that you might want to do. But play around with the different effects. There's obviously so many of them. Some of them are a little bit more useful than others, in my opinion, but it's a fun tool that you can play with. Now, another way in which you can use effects is, rather than just doing it on the transitions, you can play around with effects and add extra tension and extra anticipation during build-ups just before a track drops. Now, there's a couple of ways which I like to do this. First and foremost, I use the color effects. I typically use the dub echo and the space effect for this. That works very, very well. And another little effect that I also do is actually using a loop on the non-playing deck, tightening the loop tighter and tighter, so it adds that anticipation just before the track drops. So I'll show you that now. I've got this Thomas Bisquera track again, and it's that breakdown. So I'm just going to scroll through this track a little bit, because the first example is just going to be the color effect that I'm going to use just before the drop. So first up, we've got space. Using it subtly to begin with. Increase in intensity. And then very quickly before the drop, removing the effect so that, you know, the crowd get to experience the full effect of the drop. And the same can be done with dub echo. Finally then, let's move on to this looping technique that I mentioned a couple of moments ago. I'm going to talk it through first. Basically, what you're going to do is have a track playing out to the crowd. Imagine this track here is playing out to the crowd. You're going to find a one beat drum loop. It can be from any track that you want, okay? And you're going to have that set on the non-playing deck. During the build-up of this track before it drops, you're going to introduce that drum loop, that one beat loop, and then you're going to make it shorter and shorter, adding to the intensity, and then pulling that down, pulling the fader down on that loop just before the track drops. Now, a lot of big DJs actually use this technique. Eats Everything springs to mind immediately. He does this on pretty much every track. And a lot of other DJs, if they're not doing it using a loop, they will be doing something similar using drum pads on a little effects unit that appears on stage called an RMX 1000. A lot of clubs that I will play in and potentially venues that you might work in may not have this effects unit. It is on the big festival stages, the big nightclubs. And so this is another way in which you can do that similar effect. So let me show you this in action. Okay, so for this demonstration then, I'm going to use the same two tracks that I have been using throughout this video. However, I'm going to take one of the drum loops, or a loop, should I say, from the intro of the track, because that's the most instrumental part. Now you have to imagine that this track here is playing out to the crowd. And what I'm going to do is get my 1 beat loop from my track. Just hit Q on that. I haven't exited the loop, so as soon as I hit play, it's going to start looping again. And I'm just going to take out a little bit of the low EQ just because it is quite intense. Now, this track here, of course, has reached its breakdown playing out to the crowd. So that will be playing out to the crowd. I am going to just scrub forward a little bit just so that it saves a bit of time. So you can see there, I introduced the loop, I shortened it some more, just to create an extra layer of drums and an extra layer of anticipation, a bit more intensity. I used the filter sound color effect just to filter out just before the drop, and then took the fader down just before the drop. Very simple yet effective tool that you can use. So there we have it, some very simple yet effective techniques that you can implement very quickly and very simply when it comes to your transitions. I on purposely kept this as simple as possible, really to appeal to the beginner DJs out there. So if you've literally just learned how to mix, this is almost like a level 2. In next week's video, I'm going to focus on some techniques to level up your DJing off the decks, because as we know, in 2025, DJing is so much more than just switching on your controller and mixing. So do stick around for that. Please do give this video a thumbs up. It helps to spread the word to other like-minded individuals. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I will catch you in the next video.